The sudden U.S. seizure of Venezuela's largest sanctioned oil tanker, the Skipper, off the Caribbean coast, has ignited one of the most dangerous geopolitical flashpoints of 2025, one that could reshape the balance of power in the Western Hemisphere. What happened over the last 48 hours is not an isolated maritime enforcement incident. It's a calculated strategic move by Washington, and the timing is no coincidence. For years, the United States tolerated Venezuela's workaround networks for exporting sanctioned oil, especially when global markets were unstable. But now, with shifting alliances, rising military tensions, and new blocs challenging American influence seizing the Skipper, is a message written in steel. The United States is reasserting dominance in the Caribbean, and any attempt to undermine it will come at a cost. To understand the gravity of this moment, we need to examine the broader chessboard. Venezuela is no longer acting alone. Over the past 2 years, Caracas has tightened strategic cooperation with Russia and Iran, allowing military advisors, financial networks, and intelligence cooperation to expand in ways that deeply frustrate Washington. Iranian tankers have used Venezuelan ports as logistical hubs, and Russian private security contractors have been spotted assisting in coastal defense operations. The U.S. sees this not as isolated cooperation, but as the slow construction of a hostile triaxis in America's own backyard. So when the U.S. Coast Guard intercepted the Skipper, a vessel linked directly to Venezuelan state-owned PDVSA, this was not merely the enforcement of sanctions. It was the first major move in a pressure campaign designed to break the growing influence of Russia and Iran in Latin America. But why now? The timing reflects 3 urgent strategic pressures. First, Washington is under immense domestic and international pressure to reassert control over sanctioned oil flows, because global energy markets are shifting rapidly, and any illicit supply chain undermines U.S. leverage. Second, political changes in Washington have reintroduced a more aggressive stance toward anti-American regimes in the region. And third, intelligence assessments suggest that Venezuela is preparing to expand military cooperation with foreign partners, potentially allowing advanced drone or missile systems to be stationed closer to U.S. shores. If that happened, it would fundamentally alter the security map of the Caribbean. That's why the Skipper's seizure isn't just about oil, as about preventing an irreversible geopolitical shift. Venezuela's reaction so far has been carefully controlled, but underneath the public statements, there's real panic. Caracas understands that it cannot risk a direct military confrontation, yet it also knows that appearing weak would undermine its internal legitimacy. So instead of responding militarily, Venezuela is likely to escalate diplomatically, calling the move an act of piracy, rallying support in the UN, and leaning heavily on Russia and Iran for political backing. But here lies the danger. Russia sees any instability near U.S. borders as an opportunity. If Moscow chooses to send naval vessels, military advisors, or even surveillance aircraft to support Venezuela's sovereignty, the Caribbean could become the next arena of indirect confrontation between major powers. Iran, too, may increase its presence through intelligence and cyber support, further complicating U.S. calculations. Meanwhile, the U.S. action carries real economic consequences. Seizing such a massive tanker disrupts Venezuela as already fragile export chain and sends a chilling message to companies and intermediaries operating in the gray zones of sanctioned oil trading. It effectively raises the cost of doing business with Caracas and forces Venezuela as allies to reconsider how far they are willing to go to bypass U.S. enforcement. This is economic warfare disguised as maritime security, and it's remarkably effective. Yet the U.S. must calculate carefully. If oil markets tighten again, the global backlash could be significant, especially from countries dependent on discounted Venezuelan crude. What's next? There are 3 major scenarios. The first is a controlled escalation. Venezuela intensifies its rhetoric. Russia and Iran express solidarity, but the confrontation remains political rather than military. This scenario keeps tensions high but avoids a crisis. The second scenario is a dangerous chain reaction. Russia or Iran increases their presence in the Caribbean, prompting the U.S. to send additional naval assets, and suddenly the region experiences the closest military standoff since the Cuban Missile Crisis. The third scenario, less likely but possible, involves Venezuela taking aggressive asymmetric action, such as detaining foreign vessels or threatening regional waters, which would trigger a swift American response and potentially a conflict neither side truly wants. But beneath all the noise, the core question remains: why is the Caribbean suddenly a hotspot again? Because control of the Caribbean means control of energy routes, maritime trade, and strategic influence across the Americas. The U.S. is determined not to allow any hostile power or coalition of powers to establish a foothold there. The seizure of the Skipper is the first shot in a new phase of geopolitical competition. Whether this ends in diplomacy, pressure, or confrontation will depend on how far Russia, Iran, and Venezuela are willing to push back, and how much risk Washington is prepared to take to maintain dominance in its sphere of influence.